It's the weight that gets you first. Not the darkness, not the silence, but the crushing, indifferent weight of 3 feet of packed Anatolian soil. You can feel the ribs of the man next to you, Vahan, a baker you've known since childhood, snapping under the pressure. You're both still breathing, or trying to. Every time you exhale, the dirt shifts, filling the space where your lungs used to be. You realize then that the promise was a masterpiece of legalism. No blood was shed. Your skin is perfectly intact. You're just being deleted from the surface of the earth. This isn't a nightmare. It's the year 1400 in the city of Sivas. And the man standing above your communal grave, watching the dirt level out with a rhythmic, steady tap of his finger against his horse's saddle, is Tamerlane. He didn't just win wars. He dismantled the concept of humanity. 17 million people. That's 5% of the entire global population at the time. If you took every person alive on the planet today and erased 1 out of every 20, you begin to understand the shadow this man cast. He was a polyglot, a chess master, and a man who could discuss Persian poetry while his engineers calculated the structural integrity of a pyramid made of human heads. Most conquerors want a kingdom to rule. Tamerlane, he was fine with a graveyard. Take the city of Urgench. It wasn't just a trade hub, it was a statement. When the city dared to rebel in 1388, Tamerlane didn't just execute the leaders. He ordered a total biological erasure. His soldiers moved through the streets with a chilling, bureaucratic efficiency. They didn't just kill, they deconstructed. Every mosque, every library, every private home was reduced to rubble. Then he did something that still haunts archaeologists. He ordered his men to plow the ruins and sow the entire site with barley. He didn't want a ruin. He wanted a field. He wanted travelers to pass by a year later and wonder if a city had ever even existed there. But Sivas and Urgench were just the warm-up. In 1387, he reached Isfahan. The city leaders were smart. They surrendered immediately. They opened the gates. Tamerlane walked in, set up a tax office, and left a garrison of soldiers to collect the coins. It was supposed to be a standard occupation, but a local man named Kian, fueled by a mixture of pride and desperation, started a riot. He killed a tax collector. Then the city rose up and slaughtered the garrison. Tamerlane turned his horse around. He didn't come back to negotiate. He came back with a quota. He commanded his army to bring him 70,000 heads, not 70,000 prisoners, 70,000 severed, recognizable human heads. Soldiers who had been friends for decades suddenly found themselves in a frantic, gore-slicked competition. They hunted through Isfahan like predators. When they reached the count, they didn't just throw them in a pile. Tamerlane's architects began to build. They used the skulls as bricks, mortarized, with mud, constructing 28 massive towers that ringed the city. A chronicler named Hafiz tried to count them, but his hands started shaking so violently he had to drop his pen. He sat in the dirt and vomited until he passed out. The towers didn't just stand for days, they stood for years, the wind whistling through empty eye sockets, a permanent broadcast of what happens when you mistake Tamerlane's patience for weakness. By 1398, he was 60 years old and bored. He looked toward Delhi. The Sultan of Delhi had 120 war elephants, armored in chainmail with poisoned blades attached to their tusks. Tamerlane had 100,000 Hindu prisoners who were slowing down his march. He looked at the prisoners, then at the elephants, and made a decision that felt less like military strategy and more like a fever dream. He ordered all 100,000 prisoners executed in a single afternoon. The ground didn't just get wet. It turned into a swamp of red mud that his horses struggled to walk through. Then he turned to the problem of the elephants. He gathered his baggage camels and loaded them with bundles of dry hay. As the armored giants of Delhi charged, Tamerlane's men set the camels on fire and drove them straight into the path of the elephants. Imagine the scene. The smell of burning fur, the screaming of the animals, and the sight of living torches sprinting toward the Sultan's front line. The elephants, terrified by the chaos, panicked. They turned around and stampeded through their own infantry, crushing the very army they were meant to protect. Delhi was broken. For 5 days, Tamerlane's soldiers treated the city like a resource to be mined. They stripped the gold from the walls and took the best artisans as slaves back to Samarkand. The city was so thoroughly destroyed that it took a century for the population to return to its previous levels. But it was Baghdad that saw the final evolution of his cruelty. 1401. The city had rebelled once too often. Tamerlane didn't just give an order. He gave a mandate. Every single soldier in his massive army was required to produce 2 heads. Minimum. The fear in the ranks was as thick as the heat. Soldiers knew that if they didn't meet the quota, their own heads would be used to fill the gap. It turned the massacre into a frenzied, desperate hunt. Men who couldn't find enough victims in the streets began to look at their own captives, people they could have sold for a fortune, and slaughtered them just to have the proof. There are stories, whispered through history, of soldiers who were so desperate to meet the count that they turned their blades on their own wives. The history of our world is written in blood, and if you want to see how deep the ink runs, you need to subscribe right now. The soldiers piled the heads into 120 towers. The physical infrastructure of Baghdad, the center of the Islamic Golden Age, was systematically dismantled. Tamerlane spared the mosques, not out of piety, but to make the surrounding ruins look even more desolate. He wanted the survivors to sit in the house of God and look out at a world that had been completely unmade. Tamerlane died 4 years later, not on a battlefield, but in a bed, planning his next invasion. His empire didn't last. It fractured and dissolved within a few generations, but that wasn't the point. He didn't build an empire of land. He built an empire of memory. We are standing here, 6 centuries later, still chilled by the same shadows he cast over the plains of Eurasia. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to ensure that for as long as humans have voices, they would use them to speak his name in a whisper.